Welcome to the Inner Essence, a space of mindfulness, spiritual awakening, and reconnecting with your true self. Breath, be present, and begin your journey with it.
The moment of hesitation, that flicker when something inside whispers, don't send that message, don't say that word, it's gone before you can name it. And yet, that split second could have rewritten everything that followed. Most people never notice it. They move as if driven by invisible code, mistaking repetition for reality, never realizing that the power to shift their entire world hides inside that pause, inside the one who sees. Because the observer within you isn't watching from a distance, it's shaping what unfolds. Physics stumbled on this secret a century ago, but consciousness has known it far longer. What's observed transforms. Today is not about belief or mysticism. It's about the moment you begin to see seeing and realize your observer has been influencing reality all along. You wake up, grab your phone, scroll, react. A message, a thought, a flicker of irritation, and before you realize it, the day has already begun steering you, not the other way around. That's the silent coup of the automatic mind. You think you're the one choosing your actions, but in truth, your nervous system has been rehearsing this pattern for years. 95% of your thoughts, impulses, and micro-decisions are recycled material, background noise masquerading as choice. The brain is an economy of energy. Its goal isn't truth or creativity, it's efficiency. That's why once it learns a loop, it will run it indefinitely unless something or someone interrupts it. That someone is supposed to be your conscious observer. But most of the time, the observer is asleep, lulled by the hum of familiarity. The mind whispers, "You've seen this before," and the observer believes it. That's the invisible error, mistaking repetition for reality. Think of your mental activity as a city seen from above at night. Highways of thought light up where electricity flows most often, habit routes. The lesser used roads fade into darkness. The brain strengthens what's used and prunes what's not. This is neuroplasticity at work, but it can become a prison of comfort. Without observation, you don't live your life. You relive your past over and over, packaged as today. It's not malevolence, it's physics. Your neural circuits fire and wire together based on attention. If you don't pay attention to what's actually happening, the brain defaults to predictive mode. It guesses, and when it guesses, it doesn't predict based on possibility. It predicts based on memory. So every unobserved moment is filtered through a database of outdated experiences. You're not seeing the world, you're seeing your interpretations of it. That's why real change feels so elusive. You try to decide differently, but the decision is already half made before it reaches consciousness. Cognitive scientists call this pre-conscious processing. The signal to act fires in your brain milliseconds before you believe you've made a choice. The observer is supposed to catch that gap, to notice the pattern before it completes. But when the observer is absent, the program runs by itself, flawlessly, like a machine executing old code. Pause here for a moment. Bring to mind one behavior you've tried to change, maybe impatience, distraction, or the reflex to check your phone in silence. Watch how quickly the urge arises when the trigger appears. It feels spontaneous, but it's not. It's procedural memory firing on cue. And that tiny delay between impulse and execution, that's the entry point for awareness. When you recognize the automation, you disrupt it. Observation becomes a kind of cognitive interrupt, forcing the system to recalculate. But the automatic mind resists interruption. It will rationalize, defend, even disguise itself as awareness. It'll say, "I'm just thinking things through," when in fact it's looping familiar narratives. The observer's task is not to silence the mind, it's to see the loop for what it is. Observation in this sense isn't passive watching, it's active recognition. It's shining a light on the invisible infrastructure of habit until the system becomes transparent. Here's a subtle test. Throughout the day, notice how many of your thoughts start with "I should," "I need to," or "I always." These phrases often signal automatic scripts. You can feel the tension of pre-written expectation in them. When that tension appears, you've caught the mind mid-program. In that instant, the observer flickers awake, and for a brief moment, you're no longer inside the story, but seeing it from outside. Every genuine act of consciousness begins there, in that split second of seeing. Neuroscientists might describe it as a shift in meta-awareness. Mystics might call it awakening. But at the level of mechanism, it's simply the brain being seen by itself, feedback completing its loop. When that happens, the system pauses. In the pause, something remarkable occurs. New information can enter. And that pause is not just psychological, it's physical. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-regulation, lights up. The amygdala quiets. Observation literally rewires the brain's circuitry of reaction. You're no longer running the program, you're editing it in real time. Yet, most people never experience this consistently because they mistake awareness for thought. They believe that because they're thinking about something, they're conscious of it. But thought is what happens inside the system. Observation is what happens outside it. The difference is as vast as being in a dream and realizing you're dreaming. The invisible error of the automatic mind is not just missing awareness, it's believing you already have it. That's why the autopilot survives. It hides behind the illusion of control. To see this is not discouraging, it's liberating. Because once you know that your mind is running old scripts, you can finally begin to ask, who's watching the script run? And that question, quiet, simple, radical, is the threshold to something the early physicists stumbled upon but rarely explained. That observation itself, not the mechanism observed, changes the behavior of reality. The next step is to understand how science proved it, and why that proof may hold the key to reclaiming your observer's true power. Imagine standing in a dark room where light behaves like a riddle. You flick a switch expecting clarity, but instead you see that the light, the very symbol of certainty, refuses to choose what it wants to be. Sometimes it acts like a wave, spreading out in smooth interference patterns. Sometimes it behaves like a particle, hitting a specific point as if it made a decision. What makes it change its mind? The answer that unsettled a century of physics was this: the light's behavior depends on whether it's being observed. The double-slit experiment began as a curiosity in the early 1800s. Thomas Young wanted to understand how light traveled. When he passed light through two thin slits and saw an interference pattern on the wall behind, alternating stripes of brightness and shadow, he concluded light was a wave. Simple enough. But more than 100 years later, when scientists repeated the experiment with single photons, expecting the same wave pattern, they found something eerie. If no one measured which slit the photon passed through, the interference pattern appeared, as if the photon traveled through both slits simultaneously, like a probability cloud. But the moment a detector was placed to see which slit it used, the interference vanished. The photon behaved like a solid particle, choosing one path. Observation changed the outcome. Measurement altered reality's behavior. It wasn't superstition, it was data. What disturbed the physicists most wasn't just the result, but the implication. Reality, at its most fundamental level, doesn't fully exist in a defined way until it is observed. The experiment was repeated with increasing sophistication over decades, always confirming the same paradox. When not observed, particles act like waves, potential, uncertain, undefined. When observed, they collapse into a single state. You can sense the philosophical shockwave beneath this. If observation affects particles, what does it mean to observe? Does human consciousness itself play a role, or is it merely the act of measurement, any detection, even by a machine? Physicists still argue over that question, yet even within purely scientific boundaries, one truth remains. The observer cannot be cleanly separated from what is observed. The line between subject and object is blurrier than we ever imagined. This wasn't just poetic speculation, it reshaped the foundations of physics. The Copenhagen interpretation, led by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg, proposed that physical systems do not have definite properties until measured. The universe, in a sense, lives in a state of potential until an act of observation brings one possibility into focus. Reality is participatory. Now, hold that idea beside your own life. Every day, countless experiences, thoughts, sensations, reactions exist like quantum possibilities inside your awareness. The moment you observe one consciously, name it or attend to it, it collapses from background noise into experience. What you don't observe remains in potential form, influencing you invisibly. The experiment isn't just about particles, it's about perception. Observation doesn't create the world out of nothing. It shapes the version of the world you interact with. Neuroscience surprisingly echoes this. When you pay attention to a stimulus, a sound, a face, a feeling, your brain amplifies certain neural pathways and silences others. It's not unlike a quantum collapse. Attention selects reality. What you notice becomes real for you. What you ignore fades into irrelevance, but there's a hidden detail in the double-slit story that few mention. In some versions of the experiment, scientists delayed the act of observation, deciding after the particle had passed through the slits whether to measure it or not. Strangely, the results still matched the choice made later, as if the particle's past behavior adjusted itself to fit the observation. The timeline itself seemed flexible. The universe didn't just wait to be seen, it adapted to the act of being seen. What does that mean for human consciousness? Perhaps that our observation isn't passive. Perhaps the very structure of reality is responsive to awareness. The key, however, is understanding what kind of observation matters. Physics tells us it's not the eye that changes the outcome, but the act of measurement, the presence of attention itself. Think about this the next time you glance at something without really seeing it, a person's face, the movement of your own breath, the subtle change in your mood. Are you observing or merely looking? Because, as physics revealed, the difference between those two is the difference between potential and manifestation. It's tempting to leap into mysticism here, but the lesson is more grounded. The double-slit experiment doesn't claim that your thoughts magically create the universe. It reveals that observation participates in it, that attention is a form of interaction, not detachment. And if the smallest particles respond to being observed, it's worth asking, what happens in your inner world when you observe your own thoughts with the same precision? That's where the next discovery lies, and not in the photons, but in the perceiver, because the true observer in you isn't the eye, the brain, or even the act of looking. It's something quieter, deeper, that doesn't watch the world from outside but from within consciousness itself, and until that is recognized, the experiment of being human remains half complete. If physics shocked the world by showing that observation changes what's observed, psychology reveals the next quieter shock. The observer is not your eyes, nor even your brain. It's something that cannot be seen at all, yet without it, nothing is ever truly seen. You've probably felt it before, though rarely named it. That subtle difference between looking and seeing. You can look at a sunset and think, that's beautiful, yet be somewhere else entirely, lost in memory. And then, perhaps once in your life, the same sunset stops you. For a moment everything stills, the inner noise fades, the world feels sharper, more alive, as if reality itself leaned closer. That's the observer, not the eyes, but the awareness behind them. Vision, biologically speaking, is a stream of data. Photons hit the retina, electrical signals travel through the optic nerve, the brain reconstructs an image. But seeing is something else. Seeing requires consciousness. Without that inner witness to receive it, the picture never becomes experience. It's just a pattern of light. The forgotten detail, both in physics and in human life, is that it isn't the act of measurement that transforms the world. It's the presence of awareness that interprets it. The distinction sounds abstract until you test it. Try, for example, focusing your gaze on a nearby object. Say your hand. Notice the lines, the skin texture, the motion of your breathing underneath. At first, you're looking at a hand. But now, shift your attention from what you're seeing to the one who's seeing. Turn the spotlight inward. What notices the hand? You can't find it as an image. The observer isn't visible, yet its presence is undeniable. The eyes transmit, consciousness receives. Neuroscience supports this in unexpected ways. The brain doesn't process vision as a continuous stream, but in discrete snapshots around 10 per second. Between those snapshots, there's a gap, a microsecond where perception resets. Consciousness stitches those gaps into a fluid experience. Without that stitching awareness, the world would appear fragmented like a film reel with missing frames. You could say the eyes provide the data, but consciousness gives it coherence. That same mechanism plays out not only in vision, but in every sense, every thought, every feeling. You're not the activity of your mind, you're the field in which that activity appears. Yet the modern human lives hypnotized by content, the seen, the heard, the remembered, forgetting the silent presence that makes perception possible. The eyes are windows, but consciousness is the light that passes through them. This confusion, mistaking the instruments for the observer, is what keeps the automatic mind in charge, because if you believe the observer is the body, you think observation is passive. Light enters, data processes, perception happens. But if you realize the observer is consciousness, something radical shifts. Observation becomes participatory. It's not that you watch the world, you engage it by being aware of watching. That's when the field of perception changes, just as the double-slit experiment revealed. You can test this in an ordinary moment. The next time someone speaks to you, instead of focusing on their words, focus on your awareness of listening. Feel that double-layered attention, sound moving outward, awareness holding it. You'll notice an expansion, a small pocket of stillness behind the conversation. That stillness is the observer's domain. The words still reach you, but you're not lost inside them. Consciousness has stepped forward. Many spiritual traditions have tried to point to this, often wrapped in metaphors. The inner witness, the light of awareness, the seer behind the eyes. But it's not mystical poetry. It's a measurable shift in perception. When the observer wakes up, brain activity moves from the limbic centers of reactivity toward the frontal cortex of regulation and insight. Attention stabilizes, emotion cools, clarity rises. The world doesn't change, your relationship with it does. And yet this recognition brings a paradox. You can't observe the observer directly. Try to look for it and it slips away, because it is the act of looking itself. That's why ancient philosophies described it as the eye that cannot see itself. The moment you realize that, a quiet humility enters. Awareness isn't something you do, it's something you are. The observer doesn't belong to you, you belong to it. And here lies the subtle bridge between science and inner practice. In the laboratory, the observer affects the particle. In the mind, awareness affects perception. Both reveal that reality depends not only on what's seen, but on the presence doing the seeing. But there's another layer still, one that determines which parts of reality even reach your awareness in the first place. The mind filters more than 99% of sensory data before consciousness ever gets it. You literally can't perceive what your brain has decided doesn't matter. That means the observer's power isn't just in awareness, but in what attention allows to enter awareness at all. To understand that filter, and how it silently edits your world every second, we need to look deeper into the brain's hidden gatekeeper, the system that decides what's real to you and what gets deleted before you even notice. Right now, as you read these words, your brain is deleting almost everything else around you. The hum of electricity, the temperature of the air, the faint pressure of your clothes, all erased, filtered out before consciousness ever receives them. You live in truth inside a customized slice of reality, shaped not by what exists, but by what your nervous system allows you to notice. This filtering isn't a flaw, it's survival. Your brain is bombarded by roughly 11 million bits of sensory data per second. Conscious awareness can handle only about 40 of them. To manage that flood, the brain employs a gatekeeper, the reticular activating system, or RAS. It's a bundle of neurons at the base of the brainstem that decides which stimuli make it to the surface of your awareness. What the RAS marks as important, you see. What it deems irrelevant vanishes. But here's the twist. The RAS doesn't work objectively. It's trained by emotion, repetition, and belief. Whatever you think about most, whatever you fear or desire, the RAS tags as relevant. That means your brain literally edits reality to confirm your internal narrative. It's not that the world hides things from you, your attention does. You can observe this mechanism in something as mundane as buying a car. The day you decide on a specific model, you suddenly see it everywhere, in traffic, in commercials, even in the background of movies. Of course, those cars were always there. What changed wasn't the world, but your internal filter. The RAS adjusted its priorities to match your focus. This same system operates in your relationships, your opportunities, even your sense of self. If your inner language says, "I never get a break," the brain highlights every missed chance to prove you right, while quietly deleting the moments when help or luck appeared. You're not seeing the full map, only the regions your attention lights up. It's like walking through a gallery with a flashlight. The paintings you illuminate feel like reality, while the rest of the room disappears into shadow. Yet the unseen art still exists, waiting for a beam of attention to reveal it. The observer's power lies in moving that beam deliberately instead of letting old programming aim it for you. This is why awareness training, mindfulness, or even simple observation exercises can feel almost supernatural in effect. They don't change the outer world, they retrain the RAS. Each time you consciously notice a sensation or pattern, you signal the system, "This matters." Over time, the filter reorganizes, making the unseen visible. That's why gratitude practices, for instance, gradually increase well-being, not by inventing new blessings, but by teaching the brain to stop deleting them. There's also a physiological rhythm to it. The RAS works closely with the limbic system, which processes emotion, and with the prefrontal cortex, which sets intention. When you're anxious, fear hijacks the filter. Your field of awareness narrows. The RAS prioritizes threats. You literally lose peripheral vision and creative insight because the brain is funneling energy into survival mode. When calm returns, the filter opens again. Reality expands. The world changes. But what changed was the state of your nervous system. If you pay attention, you'll start noticing this contraction and expansion throughout your day. During stress, everything feels smaller, more binary, urgent. When relaxed, possibilities multiply. It's not mystical, it's mechanical. The observer's emotional tone writes the algorithm for what the RAS shows you next. This is where science quietly meets consciousness. The brain's filter doesn't just process incoming data, it learns from your patterns of observation. Every act of awareness reshapes the next act of awareness, a feedback loop of perception and attention. You train your future perception by what you notice now. There's also a blind spot in the literal sense. Where the optic nerve meets the retina, no photoreceptors exist, a hole in your field of vision, yet you don't see a hole. The brain fills it in automatically using surrounding information. In the same way, your mind fills emotional or cognitive blind spots with assumptions so seamless they feel true. You don't realize what you're not seeing because the mind paints over the gaps. That's why introspection often brings discomfort. It rips away that mental patchwork, revealing how much of your certainty was just filler. Here's a small experiment. The next time you're in conversation, notice one detail you would normally ignore. The sound of your own breathing, a color in the background, a subtle expression on the other person's face. You'll feel the moment widen slightly, as if another layer of the world appeared. That's the RAS responding in real time to a new signal of relevance. You just expanded the boundaries of your visible world. But awareness can only reach as far as emotional clarity allows. If the heart is in turmoil, the filter obeys confusion. The observer may awaken, but its vision bends under the weight of unprocessed feeling. That's the next layer of distortion. One that doesn't just filter what you see, but changes how you see. And until emotion is understood, even the clearest mind remains half-blind. Picture this. You walk into a room after an argument, and though no one speaks, you feel the tension. Your chest tightens, your senses sharpen, your mind begins to interpret faces, tones, even silences through that emotional lens. What's strange is that the external world hasn't changed. The lighting, the furniture, the air are all the same. Yet your experience of it has completely shifted. That's the quiet power of emotion. It edits perception before you can think. The truth is that you never see the world directly. You see it filtered through your emotional state, shaped by chemical signatures that color your attention. Neuroscientists have shown that emotion isn't separate from cognition. It's the frame through which cognition operates. When fear, anger, or sadness rises, they don't merely make you feel differently. They make you see differently. The amygdala floods the body with signals of urgency, narrowing your attention to potential threats. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of reason and perspective, dims, conserving resources for survival. In that state, the observer within you falls asleep. You don't perceive reality, you perceive danger. That's why anxiety feels so convincing. It doesn't present itself as a feeling, but as a fact. Something's wrong. The emotion hijacks your RAS, the brain's filter, and forces it to scan for evidence that matches the inner unease. Suddenly, every noise feels suspicious, every delay personal, every silence loaded with meaning. The outer world rearranges itself around your inner turbulence. It's not that life got darker, your lens did. This emotional bias isn't always negative. Joy and gratitude also alter perception, expanding awareness, increasing peripheral vision, and improving cognitive flexibility. Positive emotion literally opens the mind's aperture. Psychologist Barbara Fredrickson calls this the broaden and build effect, a state where your brain gathers more information, connects ideas faster, and perceives opportunity where fear once saw only risk. In essence, emotion doesn't just color perception, it sets its boundaries. And here's the paradox. Emotion is both a messenger and a manipulator. It tells you what matters, but it also distorts what's true. To ignore emotion is to lose empathy. To obey it blindly is to lose clarity. The observer's task is to feel fully without being ruled by feeling. That's not suppression, it's precision. It's standing in the fire of your own chemistry and seeing through the heat. You can experience this directly. The next time anger arises, don't rush to justify it or push it away. Simply observe what it does. Feel how the body tightens, how attention narrows, how the world seems to reduce to a single point of frustration. Then, take one conscious breath. In that breath, something remarkable happens. The prefrontal cortex re-engages. The observer returns. You've created a micro-interval between stimulus and reaction, the very space Viktor Frankl described as the birthplace of freedom. This space doesn't remove emotion, it reframes it. Instead of being inside the emotion, you begin to witness it. The same brain that once painted the world in panic now starts seeing detail again. The temperature of the room, the rhythm of your breath, the fact that no external threat is present. Emotion stops driving the camera and becomes part of the scene. And within that shift, consciousness deepens. Over time, the practice of noticing emotions without acting on them rewires the emotional circuitry itself. MRI studies show that mindfulness, the deliberate observation of internal states, reduces amygdala activity while strengthening prefrontal regulation. In other words, each moment of emotional awareness trains the nervous system to trust observation more than impulse. The observer evolves from passive witness to active regulator of reality. Still, the trap remains subtle. Many people mistake overthinking for awareness. They analyze their emotions endlessly, but never actually feel them. The mind narrates, the body tenses, and the observer remains absent, trapped in commentary instead of contact. Real observation requires direct sensory attention, the warmth in the chest, the pulse behind the throat, the specific texture of sadness or joy. Emotion becomes tangible, almost physical and therefore workable. And that's the essence of power, not to control feeling, but to see it clearly enough that it loses its authority. The observer doesn't fight emotion, it integrates it into perception. Once that happens, your attention no longer belongs to the mood of the moment, it belongs to you. Right now, take a few seconds to check in. What emotion is coloring your perception as you read this? Curiosity, resistance, calm, maybe even doubt. Whatever it is, name it silently. You've just stepped outside the loop. Even for a breath, that's awareness reclaiming command. If this realization hits something in you, If you've noticed how often emotion drives your focus before thought catches up, pause and let that recognition land. Then, in the comments, write just one word that names the emotion most often steering your perception lately. It could be fear, hope, tension, gratitude. Naming it is not just sharing, it's observing in public. And that simple act begins to shift the chemistry of awareness itself. Because the next question, the one waiting quietly behind emotion, isn't what you feel but where your attention goes when you feel it. And that brings us to a deeper field of energy and direction, the true physics of attention itself. There's a quiet physics to the way you look at the world. Every moment of attention functions like a vector, a directional flow of energy shaping what becomes vivid and what fades to background. It's not a metaphor. Neuroscience shows that focus isn't simply awareness, it's an active redistribution of energy across the brain. And physics, in its own vocabulary, tells a similar story. Wherever measurement, observation, occurs, probability collapses into a single state. Both disciplines hint at the same law: energy follows attention. When you focus on something, billions of neurons synchronize. Blood flow increases in the corresponding networks. Glucose consumption spikes, and electrical coherence rises between brain regions. Attention, in effect, concentrates the body's resources into a single line of force. It's as if the observer aims a beam of consciousness that instructs matter, both neural and environmental, where to organize. This is not mysticism, it's measurable physiology. If you've ever tried to read while distracted, you know the sensation of dispersed energy. Thoughts scatter, comprehension weakens, fatigue sets in. The brain's electrical rhythms lose coherence, energy leaks. But when attention locks onto one thing, the texture of sound, the nuance of a word, the subtle pulse of the breath, everything aligns. The prefrontal cortex steadies, alpha and theta rhythms synchronize, and dopamine rewards the act of sustained focus. You feel more alive, not because the world changed, but because your energy stopped fragmenting. Quantum physics mirrors this principle at a fundamental level. A particle's behavior remains uncertain, a blur of possibilities, until an act of observation gives it direction. The wave collapses, and energy assumes a specific form. Human attention operates the same way in daily life. The world offers infinite stimuli, infinite paths. But the moment attention engages, one trajectory materializes. What you consistently attend to becomes the version of reality you inhabit. Consider how this plays out emotionally. When you give sustained attention to resentment, the body literally configures itself for conflict. Adrenaline rises, muscles tense, perception narrows. Give the same quality of attention to curiosity, and neurotransmitters shift. Serotonin and oxytocin increase. The nervous system opens. Vision broadens. Attention is not neutral. It instructs the chemistry of your being. You're continuously calibrating your internal state with the frequency of what you notice. There's a rhythm to this dynamic. Attention moves in pulses, expanding and contracting, focusing and releasing. This oscillation is how the brain manages energy flow. The danger comes when attention gets trapped, when the loop of thought, fear, or craving freezes the rhythm. Then energy stagnates. The mind feels heavy, time slows, and creativity vanishes. In that state, observation becomes fixation. The beam of consciousness stops scanning the field of possibility and locks onto a single frame. To free it, you must reintroduce motion, a shift of focus, even for a breath. Try this small shift right now. Let your eyes rest on one point in front of you, then softly expand your awareness to include everything around that point. The peripheral blur, the sounds, the sensation of sitting. Notice how the body relaxes as attention widens. That expansion releases energy. You're teaching your nervous system to move between precision and openness, the two poles of conscious focus. In quantum terms, it's like alternating between wave and particle, between infinite potential and defined action. Both are necessary. Too much openness and you drift in abstraction. Too much focus and you lose the field. Mastery lies in modulating attention deliberately, knowing when to converge and when to expand. It's the same principle that allows a laser to cut steel, yet also illuminate a room. Coherence and diffusion serving different purposes. Neuroscientists studying expert meditators found that this modulation isn't just mental discipline, it rewires networks of energy flow. Long-term practitioners show increased gamma synchrony, the brain's highest frequency coherence, meaning distant regions fire in unified rhythm. The subjective experience of presence corresponds to measurable physical order. Attention organizes chaos into pattern. But energy doesn't just move inward. Where you place attention externally also shapes how others respond. People unconsciously feel when they're being fully seen. The coherence of your awareness affects the nervous systems around you, a social form of quantum entanglement. When attention is scattered, interactions stay shallow. When it's steady and clean, communication deepens, creativity emerges, and even the atmosphere of a room changes. The simplest way to understand this is through resonance. Every system, atomic, biological, emotional, vibrates at a frequency. Attention tunes you to a specific frequency and draws matching information toward you. That's why a musician finds rhythm in noise, an artist sees form in shadow, a scientist detects pattern in randomness. Each has trained their attention to resonate with particular layers of reality. What you attend to becomes amplified, not by magic, but by coherence. So the quantum power of attention isn't about forcing outcomes, it's about aligning energy. You don't need to make reality obey your will. You align your focus so that the natural flow of energy moves in your direction. Attention becomes a current, not an effort. Still, most people lose this current daily because emotion reclaims control, bending the beam toward old patterns. The observer must therefore learn not just to direct attention, but to choose which potential worlds to energize. Because attention doesn't create reality from nothing. It selects it from the field of possibilities already present. And that distinction between creating and choosing opens the next revelation. The observer's power is not to invent the universe, but to navigate among its infinite versions, selecting one reality through the precision of awareness. There's a comforting myth that floats through modern spirituality, the idea that you create your own reality. It sounds empowering, even divine, but beneath that phrase hides a misunderstanding. You don't create the world out of nothing. You select it from what already exists. Reality isn't a blank canvas waiting for your imagination to paint it. It's a multidimensional field of possibilities, and attention is the mechanism that tunes your perception to one of its frequencies. You're less a creator than a navigator, steering through overlapping worlds with the rudder of awareness. Quantum physics hinted at this long before psychology caught up. In the many worlds interpretation, every possible outcome of an event coexists in parallel, all equally real. Observation doesn't generate one version. It determines which branch of reality you experience. In a similar way, consciousness doesn't summon circumstances from emptiness. It aligns with a version of the world that matches its internal state. When your perception changes, you jump timelines not by magic, but by synchronization. Think of your mind as a radio receiver. Countless frequencies fill the air right now. News broadcasts, songs, voices from other cities. You can't hear them all simultaneously. You hear the one you're tuned to. Reality works the same way. When your observer is conditioned by fear, you pick up the frequency of threat. The same external world delivers signals of risk, loss, and defense. When your observer stabilizes in curiosity or gratitude, you tune to a different broadcast, one filled with patterns of connection and opportunity. The world you perceive reflects the station you've chosen, not the sum of all that exists. This doesn't diminish your power, it refines it. The myth of total creation places a burden of omnipotence on the human psyche, as if every tragedy or obstacle were self-made. But the truth is subtler, kinder. You can't control the ocean, but you can choose which current to ride. You can't rearrange the entire field of reality, but you can select where to stand within it. And from that stance, different outcomes unfold. Neuroscience offers a parallel. The brain constantly predicts the world before perceiving it. These predictive models determine how incoming sensory data is interpreted. You don't see raw reality. You see the brain's best guess, refined by experience. Observation, then, isn't passive. It's selective. When you update your inner model through awareness, your perception reorganizes to match. You start noticing signals that your old filter ignored. The new world you encounter was always there. You just weren't tuned to it. Psychology calls this attentional bias modification. Quantum physics calls it wave function collapse. Consciousness calls it choice. All three describe the same function. Focus determines form. The observer doesn't sculpt matter from void. It highlights one configuration among infinite ones. Imagine walking into a crowded room. Hundreds of conversations buzz, but you can only attend to one voice at a time. Once you focus, the other voices fade into background noise. Then someone across the room mentions your name, and instantly your attention pivots. The sound pierces through chaos as if reality itself bent to reveal it. This is selection in action. The world didn't go silent. Your awareness changed channels. When you understand this, responsibility transforms into artistry. You stop trying to dominate reality and start collaborating with it. The observer becomes a craftsman of focus, not a magician of outcomes. You begin to ask different questions. Which frequency am I inhabiting? Which version of this situation am I energizing with attention? These are not metaphors. They are operational tools for navigating consciousness. The real miracle isn't that your thoughts create things. It's that attention selects among infinite things already waiting to be seen. That selection shapes behavior, and behavior reshapes experience, forming a feedback loop that looks like creation. But underneath, it's a process of resonance, the self aligning with one potential reality among many. You can see this in moments of transformation. Someone who lived for years in self-doubt suddenly glimpses a possibility of worthiness, and that single perception changes their choices, posture, tone, even the people they attract. It's as though they've stepped into a new version of the same world. Nothing outside visibly shifted, yet the world now mirrors their new frequency of consciousness. In quantum language, their observer collapsed, a different set of possibilities. This understanding brings both humility and liberation. You realize that reality isn't entirely yours to command, yet your position within it is infinitely adjustable. You don't need to move mountains, you only need to move perspective. The universe, vast and impartial, contains every version of your life, the fearful, the thriving, the half-awake, the fully present. The observer's task is to choose consciously, again and again, which version to inhabit. But choice alone isn't enough. Between perception and action lies a hidden space, the pause where consciousness decides whether to repeat an old selection or open a new one. That space is where true power hides, not in imagination, but in timing. Because between thought and movement, there exists a window, brief, invisible, and absolute, where awareness determines the next world you'll step into. There's a space so small it often goes unnoticed, yet within it, entire realities pivot. It's the silent pause between a thought and the movement it triggers, the fraction of a second between stimulus and response. Most of life rushes through that gap without noticing it exists. The mind reacts, the body follows, and by the time consciousness catches up, the moment has already become memory. But in that sliver of time lives the hidden tool of awareness, the point where the observer can intervene. Viktor Frankl, writing from the depths of human suffering, once said, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space lies our power and our freedom." Neuroscience now confirms the physiological truth behind his insight. Every impulse that arises, anger, fear, desire, defense, travels through the limbic system before reaching the cortex, where conscious choice becomes possible. The journey takes milliseconds, but those milliseconds are expandable. Attention can stretch them. Awareness slows time. You've probably felt it before, that instant when you almost said something you'd regret, almost sent a message out of frustration, almost reacted, but didn't. The world seemed to slow down, as if the air thickened just enough to let you choose. That is the interval. It's not just a moral pause, it's a neurological one. The prefrontal cortex, your brain's command center, activates, regulating the emotional surge, reframing the situation, redirecting energy. Every time you access this gap, you rewire the brain toward presence. This space is microscopic, yet elastic. Under stress, it shrinks. The body floods with cortisol. Attention narrows, the automatic mind seizes control. Under awareness, it expands. Breath deepens, the nervous system stabilizes, perspective widens. What was reaction becomes decision. In that shift, the observer reclaims authorship over experience. You can sense it in something as ordinary as traffic. Someone cuts you off, and the body jolts. A flush of heat, the urge to retaliate. The automatic mind reaches for the horn. But if you catch that impulse, even half a second of noticing, something astonishing happens. The energy that was about to discharge outward now stays within, available for consciousness. You feel the charge, but you don't act it out. That energy, when not spent in reactivity, becomes clarity. This pause isn't suppression. Suppression buries emotion, awareness transforms it. When you inhabit the gap fully, you still feel the surge of emotion, but without collapsing into it. You become the witness of the current, instead of the current itself. The impulse loses its hypnotic power because it's been seen. Observation metabolizes emotion. Every contemplative tradition, from Zen to Stoicism, has pointed to this invisible threshold. They call it the watcher, the still point, the second attention. But modern science offers a precise mirror: inhibitory control, the neural capacity to delay reaction long enough for the frontal lobes to reappraise context. The mind left alone operates on prediction. It assumes every moment resembles the past. The interval interrupts that loop. It says, "This moment is new. You can respond differently." Practicing this awareness reshapes time itself. As the interval expands, life stops feeling like a blur of cause and effect. You begin to sense texture within experience, micro-pauses where freedom hides. In those moments, choice becomes tangible. The power isn't in resisting emotion, but in recognizing that you have time to see before you move. That instant of seeing changes everything that follows. You can test it right now. Notice a small sensation, maybe your breathing or the weight of your hands. Then, before adjusting posture or shifting attention, just pause. Let the urge to move arise and pass without obeying it. That flicker of awareness before action is the same pause that lives between thought and behavior. It's the birthplace of self-regulation and creativity alike. Neuroimaging studies have observed that experienced meditators exhibit a delay between the neural signal for movement and the movement itself. The brain's readiness potential, the electrical preparation for action, rises, but the conscious decision follows milliseconds later. Those milliseconds are what distinguish habit from freedom. The practitioner learns to notice the rising impulse and decide whether to proceed. They live closer to that gap. The more you enter that space, the more it stretches. Time seems to slow, not because the external clock changes, but because your internal sequencing expands. The body moves in ordinary tempo, but consciousness watches from a wider field. You see not only what's happening, but the energy forming it. Within that interval, anger can turn to assertion, fear to focus, confusion to curiosity. You don't suppress impulses, you sculpt them. It's no exaggeration to say that civilization itself depends on this skill. The difference between reaction and reflection has shaped every act of compassion, innovation, and restraint in human history. The same mechanism that halts a harsh word also halts a war. Scale the interval and you scale consciousness, but even this hidden tool has a deeper layer. Once you begin to perceive the gap between thought and action, another question arises. Who is noticing that space? The awareness that observes even the impulse to choose. What is its nature? That question leads beyond neuroscience and behavior into a territory where science and spirituality converge, the meeting point between the observer effect in physics and the stillness of mind in meditation. Because what both reveal is that observation itself carries an active power, not to control but to transform by presence. And that principle, ancient and modern at once, has been quietly used by both spiritual masters and neuroscientists alike. It sounds almost paradoxical that the most advanced neuroscientists and the most devoted spiritual practitioners have been quietly training the same muscle, the capacity to observe thought without becoming it. Both have arrived through very different doors at the same laboratory, the mind itself. In neuroscience, this practice goes by many names: meta-awareness, cognitive decentering, interoceptive attention. In spirituality, it's known as mindfulness, contemplation, or presence. But the mechanism is identical. You turn awareness toward the act of thinking, feeling, or sensing itself, not toward its content. Instead of being lost in the thought, you begin to notice it as thought, an event arising in consciousness, not the totality of who you are. That slight shift changes the architecture of perception. The modern scientist might describe it as a shift from the default mode network, the part of the brain involved in self-referential narrative, toward regions associated with sensory awareness and regulation. The mystic might call it stepping out of the story. The outcome in both cases is a moment of quiet coherence. The noise of identity softens, observation sharpens, the observer reclaims the throne. Decades of brain imaging have confirmed what contemplatives intuited long before technology existed. When the mind stops grasping at its own content, the body's energy reorganizes. The prefrontal cortex lights up, the amygdala cools, heart rate steadies, and synchronization increases between hemispheres. The mind, in measurable terms, becomes more ordered. The same coherence that physicists see in quantum systems appears, metaphorically, in consciousness. Observation itself produces harmony. This exercise isn't exotic. It begins in the simplest act, noticing a thought without touching it. The ordinary person, when a thought arises, "I should answer that message, I can't believe they said that," follows it immediately, merges with it. The trained observer does something else. They notice the thought as a pattern, like a ripple in water. No judgment, no analysis, just awareness. The thought may fade, repeat, or transform, but the observer remains still. At first, the mind rebels. It craves engagement. It says, "This is pointless. You're wasting time. You should be solving problems." That's the noise of the default mode network struggling to maintain control. But when you persist, even for a minute, something subtle happens. The boundary between thinker and thought begins to dissolve. Awareness no longer identifies with mental events. It begins to rest in itself. Neuroscientists studying long-term meditators have observed this effect with awe. When such practitioners enter deep states of observation, the brain exhibits patterns unseen in ordinary waking consciousness, high-frequency gamma synchrony that links distant regions into unified oscillation. It's as if the entire system begins to hum in resonance. Subjectively, this feels like stillness, clarity, and effortless attention. Objectively, it's a symphony of coordination. Spiritual masters from every tradition describe the same phenomenon in the language of experience rather than data. They say the mind becomes transparent. Reality feels immediate, not filtered through memory or desire. Time softens. The present moment stops being a fleeting point between past and future and becomes an expansive field. Awareness observes itself, a self-reflecting mirror. This convergence between science and spirituality isn't coincidence. It's the natural meeting point of two approaches to the same mystery. One studies consciousness through the instrument of the brain. The other studies it through the instrument of awareness itself. Both arrive at the same conclusion: observation changes the observer. There's also a physical echo of this unity in quantum theory. Remember the forgotten detail from the double-slit experiment. That observation alters outcome? The same principle plays out internally. When consciousness observes a mental event without interference, the wave of potential reactions collapses into stillness. Emotion doesn't need to be suppressed or expressed. It simply resolves. The act of awareness itself transforms the pattern. And here lies the brilliance of what both neuroscientists and mystics know. The point isn't to control the mind, but to witness it so intimately that control becomes unnecessary. The nervous system, when fully observed, self-regulates. The heart rate slows without effort. The breath deepens naturally. The system returns to coherence, as if consciousness were tuning its own instrument by listening closely enough. This is not escape from reality, it's entry into it. The world appears brighter, not because anything changed, but because distortion dropped away. The observer becomes transparent, allowing reality to shine through unfiltered. The mind still thinks, emotions still move, the body still acts, but the sense of me clinging to those movements dissolves. Awareness perceives itself as the space in which everything happens. From the scientific side, this process rewires perception through neuroplasticity. The more you observe thoughts without reacting, the weaker the habitual networks become. The prefrontal cortex gains influence over the limbic centers. Emotion becomes information rather than command, and attention stabilizes. From the spiritual side, this is described as liberation, the end of identification with the passing storm of mind. Both describe the same shift in language suited to their domain. And perhaps the most remarkable realization is that this exercise never truly ends. The observer refines itself through observation. The more you look, the more transparent the looker becomes. Eventually, observation stops feeling like an act and starts feeling like a state. Effortless, continuous, alive. But even this state carries a quiet risk. When awareness becomes steady, it can begin to feel safe, contained, luminous, and yet detached from the pulse of ordinary life. The danger isn't losing focus anymore, it's losing connection. Because the world, with all its friction and noise, is the proving ground of awareness. Ignoring it would be like mastering light, but refusing to see shadows. And that brings us to the next threshold, the danger of ignoring the observer itself, and what happens when presence turns unconscious once more. There's a quiet tragedy in modern life that hides in plain sight. We've learned to function almost perfectly without awareness. We can respond to messages while walking, plan next week while eating, scroll while half listening to a friend. The machinery of existence hums efficiently, yet the one who lives it is missing. When the observer falls asleep, life continues, but the dimension of being vanishes. You keep moving, producing, reacting, but it's as if no one is home. Ignoring the observer doesn't happen in one dramatic collapse. It happens through 1,000 tiny surrenders. Every moment of unconscious reaction, every hour lost in distraction, every decision made from impulse instead of clarity erodes the bridge between consciousness and experience. The result isn't immediate suffering. It's numbness. You stop feeling depth, both in joy and in pain. Days blur into a mechanical repetition of yesterday's patterns. You live, but not in life. The brain, in its efficiency, adapts to this absence. When attention fragments, the nervous system normalizes reactivity. Dopamine loops reinforce distraction. Cortisol hardens the body's baseline tension. The organism becomes addicted to stimulation precisely because it no longer knows stillness. You mistake constant motion for vitality, but what you're really feeling is the panic of disconnection. The observer's silence isn't peace, it's amnesia. Psychology names this condition automaticity. It's the state of operating from pre-programmed schemas, where perception, emotion, and behavior run on self-sustaining loops. Once the observer is gone, those loops feed each other. Thought triggers emotion, emotion justifies thought, and around you go. Eventually, you don't experience the world. You experience your own conditioning projected onto it. The cost of this is subtle but devastating. Anxiety becomes the body's language for lost presence, a physiological protest against living without awareness. Depression, too, often hides a similar absence, a system that has grown so accustomed to internal noise that silence feels like nothingness. The danger of ignoring the observer isn't punishment from the universe, it's entropy, the natural decay of unobserved systems into chaos. You can see it play out even in collective behavior. Societies overwhelmed by distraction mirror the same neural pattern: short attention spans, amplified emotion, reactive polarization. It's as if the collective observer, the capacity for reflection, nuance, stillness, goes dormant. The result is a civilization that confuses immediacy with truth and noise with connection, the external mirrors, the internal. When individuals lose the observer, culture loses coherence. At the personal level, this disconnection shows up as misalignment between knowing and doing. You know what's right for you, rest, honesty, attention, but you can't seem to follow through. The impulse overrides insight. The body moves before consciousness catches up. The observer's absence fractures integrity. Without awareness, even wisdom becomes inert, trapped as theory instead of embodied intelligence. There's also a spiritual danger, hidden within the very pursuit of awareness. Believing that once you've understood it intellectually, you're awake. But awareness isn't an idea to remember, it's a state to sustain. The moment you assume you're conscious, you've stopped observing. Complacency is the subtlest form of unconsciousness. The ego wears the mask of the observer, saying, "I've got it now," while attention quietly slips away. And so the universe, or perhaps your own nervous system, keeps offering reminders. The argument that humbles you, the unexpected silence that forces reflection, the wave of emotion that makes you pause and breathe. These are not interruptions, they're invitations. They're the world's way of whispering, "Wake up, you're missing yourself." Neuroscience describes a similar mechanism of correction. When the brain's predictive model of reality becomes too rigid, errors accumulate. Eventually, something must break to reset the system. The same happens in consciousness. Ignore the observer long enough, and life introduces chaos to force renewal. Suffering, in this sense, is observation's emergency flare, a signal that awareness has gone offline. If you look closely, even the smallest moments of reactivity carry this warning. That sharp comment you regret, the compulsive checking of the phone, the unexplainable restlessness before sleep. They're micro-reminders of lost observation. They're the ripples caused when life runs without a witness. Each offers the same chance, to return to the interval, to remember that presence is not something you summon, but something you stop abandoning. In physics, an unmeasured system drifts in probability until an observer interacts with it. In consciousness, an unobserved life does the same, diffuse, unfocused, accidental. The act of noticing is what crystallizes reality into meaning. Without the observer, experience remains a blur of potential never chosen, never lived. And this is the true danger, not pain, not chaos, but unlived possibility. The universe offers endless frequencies of existence, but you can only inhabit the one you attend to. Ignore the observer, and attention collapses into noise. Remember it, and coherence returns, not as control but as clarity. Because the observer isn't a mystical entity watching from above. It's the living presence within every perception, the pulse of awareness that makes existence luminous. When that presence dims, the world doesn't end. It just stops being fully real. And reclaiming that reality begins not with more effort, but with a quieter recognition. The one who sees must be seen again. The true power of the observer was never about changing the world outside. It was about changing the one who sees it. When awareness returns, the same life feels new. Sound becomes richer, time slows, meaning sharpens. You stop reacting and start responding. Science calls it coherence. Mystics call it awakening. Both point to the same truth. Consciousness shapes experience by the way it pays attention. Right now, as you hear these words, turn awareness toward the one who is listening. That simple act closes the circle. You are both the experiment and the observer, the light and the one who sees it. If you've reached this point, write "I am the observer" in the comments. It lets me know you stayed with the journey all the way through. And if this message resonated with you, watch one of the videos appearing on your screen. Each one continues this exploration, deeper, clearer, and closer to the quiet intelligence behind everything you experience.